He rose in the shadow of Julius Caesar, but was to surpass him. A youth who steered Rome from civil war and anarchy to a golden age of peace and prosperity. He took the title, first among equals, but became Augustus, the first of the emperors.
He considered nothing more incumbent on him than to avenge his uncle's death. Suetonius.
In March 44 BC, Rome was in chaos. The dictator Julius Caesar had been assassinated. He had been stabbed to death by those he had considered colleagues, even friends. Republicans who believed in elected leaders. They would not accept the absolute rule of a dictator or king.
Nobody knew what was going to happen after Caesar's death. Those who killed Caesar were not prepared to take on his role, and there was a kind of vacuum. So everyone was suspected of harboring ambitions, but nobody quite knew what was going to happen.
In Rome's main public square, the Forum, Caesar's will was read out by his loyal right-hand man, Mark Antony. His will left gifts to the citizens of Rome, but passed his wealth and family name to his nearest male relative, his great-nephew, Octavius. Octavius's family were rural landowners from outside Rome, and the 19-year-old was little known to the crowd who gathered to hear Antony speak. Octavius had spent one summer on campaign in Spain with his great-uncle, and had then been sent east to Greece. There news now reached him of Caesar's murder and his inheritance. His mother wrote to him, pleading that he not get embroiled in the capital's murderous politics, but the teenager ignored her fears and set sail for Rome.
Imagine the situation. He hears the news of Caesar's assassination. He hears that he's been appointed as his main heir, the heir to a fortune, and he realizes that if he doesn't try his arm now, then he's going to get killed or go into obscurity. It must have taken huge courage, bravado, and, one suspects, a little bit of ignorance to risk so much with so little chance of success.
On his return, Octavius found that Mark Antony had taken charge. Caesar's assassins had fled Rome, and Antony had been elected as one of the city's 2 consuls who led Rome's governing body, the Senate. But many Republican senators now feared that Antony sought the absolute powers of dictatorship.
The ambition of Antony is absolutely clear, to take over Caesar's position. First, Antony's ambition is to make himself as close to Caesar as possible and to share his power, but there's plenty of competition for that, for heaven's sake. And then when Caesar's murdered, he wants to be the new Caesar.
Mark Antony's opponents hatched a plan. Octavius would be the perfect figurehead around whom others would rally. His great-uncle's popularity with the people and the army would help them secure the Republic from Antony's ambitions. Then, as the leading senator Cicero noted, once the Republic had been re-established, the young Octavius could be dispensed with.
Praise him, honor him, then get rid of him. Cicero.
The middle-aged senators would soon discover that they had underestimated the teenager.
Two men divided the whole Roman Empire between them. Appian.
Octavius accepted his great-uncle's inheritance and took the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. To history, he became known as Octavian. Octavian addressed the Senate, duly promising that he would exploit the popular support Caesar's name had brought him to protect Rome from further anarchy and dictatorship. He offered the Senate Caesar's loyal army. In return, he demanded legitimacy. The Senate, encouraged by Cicero, ignored precedent and made the teenager Octavian a senator. Cicero now unleashed a flood of abuse against Mark Antony.
Let us speak of the vilest kind of vulgarity. You, with that gorge of yours, had swallowed so much wine at Hippias' wedding that you were forced to vomit in the sight of the Roman people. In the conduct of public business, it would be disgraceful even to belch. But he vomited and filled his own lap with morsels of food reeking of wine. Cicero.
Antony countered with vicious accusations of his own.
Julius Caesar demanded sexual favors from Octavian as the price of his adoption.
But Cicero only piled insult upon insult.
How uncivilized, how crude. He has heaped on Octavian filthy charges drawn from memory of his own indecency and licentiousness.
That image, it creates an image of Antony the drunk, Antony the person who isn't capable of being a responsible politician. And this is what Romans characteristically do in these situations of public conflict. We complain about the way that modern politics turns into slanging matches between the political leaders, but that is bread and butter for the Romans. They expect it to be slanging matches. That isn't new. But in the course of the slanging matches, people get very hurt and very angry, and they don't forgive each other very easily. So Antony had plenty of very bitter enemies.
Cicero made what I always think is a rather tasteless remark when he said that the banquet of the Ides of March was one course short, and that they should have dispatched Antony as well.
The Senate now forced Mark Antony's hand, sending an army against him in northern Italy. The legions loyal to the memory of Caesar were led by his adopted son, Octavian.
In the two battles that followed, Antony's legions were defeated, although he escaped unhurt. His opponents in the Senate congratulated themselves on ending Antony's aspirations. They believed they had saved the Republic, but they had not reckoned with the ambitions of Octavian.
Octavian was presumably in exactly the same difficulty that Julius Caesar had been in 49. That if you have an army and you realize you're given a choice. If you disband it, your political career is an end. You're going to be eaten by the aristocratic wolves. If you keep your army and you use the armed force in order to bolster your political position, you stand a chance. If you've got an army, you might survive. Without an army, as a young man of 19, you've had it.
Octavian kept a firm grip on his legions, and in an act of bravado and courage, turned south towards Rome.
At the age of 19, he marched on Rome as though it were an enemy city, and sent messengers ahead in the name of his army to demand that he be made consul. When the Senate hesitated to obey, one Cornelius, a centurion leading the deputation, opened his military cloak, displayed the hilt of his sword, and boldly said, "If you do not make him consul, this will." Suetonius.
The Senate had little choice but to obey. Octavian had outmaneuvered them before they got rid of him. Now he needed a powerful ally, and without hesitation, he turned to his former enemy, Mark Antony.
They had common interests. Both wanted to avenge the death of Caesar. Their armies were eager to have them united.
Together with Lepidus, the commander of the Gallic legions, they made a pact. They would divide the empire and eliminate any opposition. In Rome, Octavian and Mark Antony launched a series of brutal and bloody proscriptions. Hundreds of senators and other opponents were killed or forced into exile.
Antony made sure that the slanderous Cicero was among them. Octavian himself co-signed the death warrants of his former allies.
Octavian was totally ruthless. He would do anything to secure the ends that he had in mind, and the removal of people who were wealthy enough or hostile enough to make that worthwhile was an imperative for him.
In search of vengeance for Caesar's death, Octavian and Antony traveled to Greece. At the Battle of Philippi, they fought the assassins, men like Brutus and Cassius, and exacted a bloody revenge.
Octavian and Antony soon edged the weaker Lepidus out of the pact and divided the empire between them.
Antony held the wealthier eastern provinces, rich with opportunity for military expansion. Octavian took the west. Both men knew the day would soon come when they would fight for it all.
I conquered at Actium. Octavian.
In Rome, Octavian began to consolidate his power. In 39 BC, he married the well-born Scribonia, but he quickly tired of his wife. Despite the political value of her connections, shortly after the birth of their daughter, Julia, he ended the marriage.
I divorced her because she nagged me. Octavian.
The following year, Octavian met and fell in love with a young woman called Livia. The 19-year-old Livia was already married with one child called Tiberius and was pregnant with another. Undeterred, Octavian forced her husband to divorce her.
The ancient sources represent it as a love match, and there's no obvious explanation of what advantage he gains from it in that particular situation. So there, it appears to be against the rules of the ordinary political game. And it is a very odd thing that, having made that marriage very unexpectedly, very suddenly, he sticks with it for the rest of his career.
Marriage was also used to bolster his strained relationship with Antony. He gave him the hand of his beloved sister Octavia, who left Rome for Antony's home in Athens. But Antony had little time for Octavia. He had fallen in love with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. She was rich, sensual, cunning. She saw Antony as the new ruler of Rome, and as she had once seduced Julius Caesar, now she seduced Antony. Their passion fueled burning political ambitions. Cleopatra wanted Antony's armies to help her build a new empire centered on Egypt. Antony saw that he could use her vast wealth to hold off Octavian. Antony dispatched a humiliated Octavia back to Rome, and without divorcing her, married Cleopatra.
Perhaps it was only when Antony allied with Cleopatra, with an alien woman, that Octavian was able to turn his fortune in such a way that he could secure a majority support of the Senate in Rome. It was that alliance with a foreign woman that turned the scales in favor of Octavian.
Octavian was further incensed by Antony's behavior when he declared that Caesarion, the illegitimate son of Cleopatra and Caesar, was the true heir to Caesar's name and wealth. In Rome, Octavian launched a war of words against Antony.
Who would not weep when he sees and hears what Antony has become? Now he has abandoned his whole ancestral way of life, has embraced alien and barbaric customs, has ceased to honor us, his fellow countrymen, or our laws, or his father's gods. He is either blind to reason or mad, for I have heard and believed that he has been bewitched by that accursed woman. Henceforth, let nobody consider him to be a Roman citizen, but rather an Egyptian. Octavian.
It's difficult to explain, but here is a leading Roman general, the master of the Eastern world, who's taken up with a beautiful Egyptian, as Caesar before had done. But it's portrayed in Rome. It's rather like as though somehow the prime minister in the middle of the Cold War had taken up with a Russian spy, a femme fatale, and immediately Antony is obliterated from the Roman political scene. Most of the Roman senators desert his cause, and even perhaps against their better judgment, see that their best interest is in supporting Octavian.
Octavian played on Rome's worst fears by claiming that Antony planned to move the capital to Egypt and subject Rome to a foreign queen.
That's where Octavian has him, because he can then exploit all the old Roman suspicions of foreigners, of kings, and of women, and create this marvelous demonology of the foreign queen who's going to ride in triumph over the ruins of the capital. And that undoubtedly plays powerfully on popular feeling in Italy.
Portraying himself as savior of Rome and its ancient traditions, Octavian made ready for war. He spent 4 years building a fleet. In 31 BC, he raised the legionary standards, prayed to the god Apollo, and set sail. The great rivalry between Octavian and Antony would reach its climax on the west coast of Greece at the Battle of Actium.
In the center could be seen the fleets of bronze, all aglow with war's array, the waves ablaze with gold. On one side, Octavian leading the Italians into battle, with the Senate, people, and the great gods. On the other side, with barbaric wealth, motley arms, and, oh, shameful thing, his Egyptian wife, stands Antony with the powers of the Orient. Virgil.
Octavian's great general Agrippa won the sea battle, but it was won at great cost.
Actium's waters have been stained with Roman blood. Seneca.
Many leading men of Rome and Italy who had sided with Antony had lost their lives. Antony fled to Egypt, a broken man, and took his own life. Octavian's great rival was dead. Cleopatra, fearful for her life, sought an audience with Octavian and reminded him of her past love for Julius Caesar. Octavian was unmoved. He planned to parade the defeated queen in triumph through the streets of Rome. For the first time, Egypt was brought into the Roman Empire and its abundant wealth seized by Octavian. Faced with humiliation and ruin, Cleopatra killed herself with the deadly bite of a venomous asp. Octavian then ordered the murder of her teenage son, Caesarion.
A world exhausted by civil war passed into his control. Tacitus.
Octavian, at the age of 33, returned to Rome.
I don't think even in 31 BC, when he becomes the sole ruler of the Roman world, that he could have seen how things would develop. The one thing he did know, that if he were ostensibly to adopt regal power, his chances of being assassinated must have been roughly the same as Julius Caesar's. So he must have known that he had to go slowly and carefully. He had to balance competing forces within the Roman aristocracy.
Octavian faced a dilemma: how to be the sole ruler and survive.
The problem's a conflict. That he said that what he's doing is delivering Rome from the oppressor. Antony's the oppressor, Antony's the tyrant. He's nicely flipped things around so that instead of him being the Caesar figure, him being the tyrant of Rome, he is the liberator, he's the Brutus, and he's rid Rome of its tyrant. But of course, in ridding Rome of his tyrant, he's made himself the tyrant. How can he now reconcile that conflict? How can he be both everyone's friend, everyone's savior, and not be the evil man who monopolizes power?
Octavian rewarded many of the old aristocracy with positions in government. The wealth of Egypt he used to put on lavish games and distribute patronage. Some saw these acts for what they were.
He seduced the army by gifts, the common people by the provision of cheap food, and everyone by the blandishments of peace. Men of spirit had died on the battlefield. The remainder were rewarded by wealth and position in proportion to their readiness to accept servitude. Tacitus.
I think the most fascinating thing about Octavian is the contrast between the thuggish, cruel, totally ruthless character that he demonstrates himself to be in the period before Actium, and the way in which he is apparently able to put that on one side and assume a completely different mask after it.
After a century of civil war and dictatorship, Octavian knew the people of Rome wanted a man of peace and stability who claimed to respect republican values. If that was what they wanted, then that was the image Octavian would give them.
Rome was not yet ready for dictatorship or for kingship or for an emperor. And he evolved a kind of balance in which people could believe that they still had some republican structures left, but at the same time, one man was in charge.
Only 4 years after Actium, he made a spectacular political maneuver. He offered to surrender his power back to the Senate.
The fact that it is in my power to rule over you for life is evident. But I am mild by nature and have no desire to dominate. The power I hold now, I lay down. Allow me to live out my life in peace.
It was a masterstroke. The Senate, thrown off balance by this act, feared renewed civil war. They had no choice but to refuse his resignation, and, as Octavian had intended, they increased his power.
His power base is resignation, and the power base must be the constant refusal of the Roman people to accept that resignation. And so long as they are saying, no, we can't do without you, at least these provinces, or at least in these areas, we need you, we need our savior, there is still an emergency. So long as they continuously say that, then he isn't the tyrant who has seized power from the Roman people.
the rule of a single man was the only possible remedy for a country in turmoil. Tacitus.
What happened in 27 is that ostensibly he resigned power. I said, look, you do want me to give up. They immediately, perhaps with the memories of the Civil War which had just ended, partly knowing which side their personal bread was buttered, they said, no, lead us. And he took on the title Princeps, primus inter pares, the first among equals.
The title Princeps allowed Octavian to avoid calling himself dictator. But behind the facade of equality, Octavian was steadily consolidating absolute power. Octavian moved to tighten his grip on the military. As commander-in-chief of the army, he made the elite unit of Praetorian Guards his personal bodyguard. The commanders of the 28 legions were restricted to 2-year tours of duty to stifle any political ambition. As a further precaution, the governors and generals in the provinces where legions were stationed were selected from Octavian's family and friends.
The real object of this arrangement was that the senators should be unarmed and unprepared for war, while he possessed arms and controlled the troops. Cassius Dio.
In Rome, Octavian took care to secure the support of the city's volatile population. He initiated public works, cleaning the river Tiber, improving water supplies, establishing firefighters. Above all, he began an extensive building campaign.
I found Rome brick and left it marble. Octavian.
If there's a feeling that you need peace and stability, you then need to generate the visible signs of peace and stability. No better way than to set about the monuments of the capital and the restoration of temples, and he proudly boasts that 82 temples were restored in a very short space of time. Visibly restoring the fabric of the city is the first symbolic gesture in I am visibly restoring the fabric of the empire.
Within 5 years, the memories of civil war had faded. The benefits of peace were felt across the empire. Even political enemies were embraced within a system of rewards and privileges.
They accept it because they're deeply implicated themselves. They joined his side and they were rewarded. And he makes quite sure that plenty of people get plenty of rewards. And building up a reward system is one of the works of Augustan genius. And these guys don't want the system to collapse on them. Of course they're behind it.
His regime was making many rich. The Senate, that once plotted to praise, honor, and get rid of him, now praised him for the new peace and honored him with a new name, Augustus, the revered one.
I received the title of Augustus by decree of the Senate, in recognition of my valor, clemency, justice, and devotion. Augustus.
Octavian had become the Emperor Caesar Augustus. His position was without rival. He was master of the Roman Empire and founder of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace.
I restored, I completed, I built, I gave. Augustus.
Augustus demanded unquestioning loyalty. In return, he offered peace, stability, law, and safety to all citizens.
Rome, under the emperors and under Augustus in particular, benefited from unprecedented prosperity. Basically, there was more money available, the taxes were flowing to Rome, Rome was being built up. The grandeur of Rome began to expand in the reign of Augustus as never before. It was the first straw in the wind of 2 centuries of unprecedented prosperity.
After decades of destructive civil war, Rome's provinces were benefiting from the Pax Romana. New towns, aqueducts, theaters, baths, roads and bridges were commissioned throughout the empire. Trade prospered and agriculture flourished.
He was, I think, keen to be seen as the restorer of normality, the restorer of people's lives. And so for a lot of ordinary Romans and Italians, he made that possible. He made an ordinary type of life, back on the land or whatever, available to them and safe for them again.
Augustus, now in his early 40s, cultivated an image of a frugal man. He slept on a camp bed and ate plain meals.
He was frugal and, as a rule, preferred the food of the common people, especially the coarser sort of bread, whitebait, fresh hand-pressed cheese, and green figs. Suetonius.
Right to the end of his life, Augustus maintained a very simple lifestyle, or I would say an ostentatiously simple lifestyle. He liked his wife to weave, for example, and to spin wool. He liked to present his family as being returning to the old virtues and the simple lifestyle of the Roman past. This was probably not quite sincere.
The image of him subsequently was of a man of immense simplicity. Augustus was a conscientious emperor and he worked extremely hard. He didn't sleep well. He was a rather sick man in some ways. He would have got up early in order to read reports. He always was conscientious as a judge, and he would have had tens, even hundreds of delegations waiting to see him. The successful ones found that he was courteous, polite, listened to them, and was quite generous in what he gave them.
Augustus made sure youthful images of himself were shipped out to every corner of the empire. Hundreds of statues, busts, coins, and cameos found their way to Spain, Judea, Greece, and Gaul.
He becomes identified with the gods, and his iconography, the way his appearance is presented, becomes astonishingly that of a classical Roman god. That's why, from Actium onwards, he has no age. He is merely divine, like the easy-living gods. He has no wrinkles, no problems.
The image was part of his act, bolstering his power and hiding the reality of approaching middle age.
His teeth were small, few, and decayed. His hair yellowish and rather curly. His eyebrows met above the nose, and one did not realize how small a man he was. Suetonius.
His popularity continued to grow. A summer month was renamed in his honor, August.
Priests made sacrifices for his well-being. The health of Augustus and the empire became synonymous.
It is quite clear that groups of leaders throughout the Roman Empire were so content with the newfound peace and the prosperity that went with it that they elevated Augustus into something akin to or to a god. And that was something quite new within the Roman religious world.
The leading poets, Horace and Virgil, were commissioned to sing the praises of their emperor.
Thy age, O Caesar, has restored to farms their plenteous crops, has banished crime, and recalled the ancient ways whereby the Latin name and men of Italy waxed great, and the fame and majesty of our dominion were spread from the sun's western bed to his arising. Horace.
In 18 BC, aged 45, Augustus initiated a moral crusade to restore traditional family values in Rome. Financial incentives encouraged citizens to marry and have children. Divorce became more difficult. Fines were imposed for adultery.
It is through men who live their lives in this way that the Romans of future years will become a mighty people. How imperative it is, if the rest of the world is to obey you, that there should be a flourishing race of ours. Augustus.
But behind the mask of morality lay hypocrisy.
Not even his friends could deny that he often committed adultery, though, of course, they said in justification that he did so for reasons of state, not simply through passion. He wanted to discover what his enemies were up to by getting intimate with their wives and daughters. Suetonius.
Augustus was well known for his own adulteries. And it's said that in his old age he took particular pleasure in deflowering virgins, and they were brought to him in his palace in droves. How far such stories are true, who knows?
But his public image remained untarnished, and his popularity unharmed. He had brought Rome and its empire out of the horrors of civil war. To secure this peace for the future, the aging emperor had to find a worthy successor.
At the height of his happiness and confidence in his family, fortune deserted him. Suetonius.
Augustus had brought an end to the Republic. He was king in all but name. His next ambition was to create a dynasty which would inherit his power.
Succession is one of the most dangerous issues for a dynast. Actually, to name a successor, to say, this person is going to be my successor, is not a good thing to do, because it takes away your power. It actually gives your power to that successor, and everyone then interests themselves in that person. That's one reason why Augustus never names a successor. What he has to do is build up a whole group behind him. He doesn't want to risk all his eggs in one basket. He needs a family.
To Augustus's great sadness, his wife Livia had borne him no children. His only child from his previous marriage to Scribonia was Julia. She became the key to Augustus's hopes of establishing an imperial dynasty. He was desperate for Julia to provide him with grandsons.
Roman fathers in political positions thought they somehow had the right to allocate their children in order to fulfill their political ambitions. And so Augustus married Julia to successive husbands in order to suit his own political ends.
Julia's first husband had died before they had children. Augustus then married her to his close friend Agrippa, 24 years her senior. Dutifully, they had 5 children, 2 of whom, Gaius and Lucius, were adopted by Augustus as his own sons. But when Agrippa died, Augustus hastily passed Julia on to her stepbrother Tiberius. She finally rebelled and disgraced her father.
His daughter was shameless beyond the indictment of shamelessness. She had been accessible to scores of lovers. She had roamed about the city in nocturnal revels. The very forum in which her father had proposed a law against adultery, she had chosen for her debaucheries. She daily resorted to the life of a whore, selling her favors to even unknown lovers. Seneca.
It was a willful, purposeful violation of the father's moral laws. And faced with this overt rebellion, Augustus decided that he would exile her. He exiled her to an island for 5 years, prohibited her from having any male visitors, and prohibited her from drinking wine. In other words, he made her life as miserable as he could.
It was rumored that Livia, Augustus's wife, may have helped bring about Julia's downfall.
I don't think Julia wanted to rebel. I think there's quite a good argument for supposing the real plot isn't Julia's plot, it's Livia's plot. That there's Livia scheming in the background to try to do down Julia and her kids and get her own son Tiberius into power. And I think that's actually quite a plausible point of view, that the reason that Julia falls is in the end that Livia goes to Augustus and says, I've got to tell you, my dear, about your daughter. There's some things you ought to know. She's been getting up to orgies in the forum, and frankly, it's a plot on you. And so she goes.
Further personal tragedies were to darken Augustus's final years. Many thought his favorite grandsons, Gaius and Lucius, had been marked out for the succession, but both died young. The 66-year-old Augustus, on whom fortune had so often smiled, was heartbroken. His health began to fail.
In winter, he wore no fewer than 4 tunics and a heavy woolen gown above his undershirt. The forefinger of his right hand would be so numbed and shrunken by cold that it hardly served to guide a pen. Suetonius.
During Augustus's rule, the empire had steadily been undergoing its greatest expansion. But in AD 9, in a campaign to consolidate the new frontier on the river Elbe, disaster struck. In the gloom and damp of a vast woodland, 3 legions were attacked by German tribes and annihilated.
He was in such consternation at this event that he let his hair and beard grow for several months and sometimes knocked his head against the doorposts, crying out, "Give me back my legions." Suetonius.
Augustus could not reconcile himself to such failure. His words of advice to his stepson Tiberius were to push the frontiers no further. Tiberius had become a strong and reliable general. Augustus had not intended that he should succeed him, as Tiberius was not his own bloodline. But now he had little choice. In AD 5, he finally adopted Tiberius as his own son and successor. An imperial dynasty had been established.
Immortality is a state which is not in our power to possess, but by living nobly and dying nobly, we do in a certain measure achieve this condition. Augustus.
In AD 14, Augustus was taken ill. He called his family and advisors to him.
Since well I have played my part, all clap your hands, and from the stage dismiss me with applause. Augustus.
With Livia by his side, Augustus died. Unlike most of the emperors of Rome who were to follow him, he died peacefully in bed. He was 76. At his funeral, an eagle was released, symbolizing Augustus's soul ascending to the heavens. Soon after his death, Augustus was declared a god.
Augustus defines the empire, defines the new system. That's absolutely clear. Caesar is the hinge that turns from the old system to the new system. But Caesar leaves the new system completely undefined. It's completely open what it might be. It's quite astonishing in how many respects Augustus sets the model for the future. Not only that, his importance is that all his successors then look back to him.
By the end of Augustus's reign, provincials all around the Mediterranean would, I think, have had the feeling that they could just get on with their lives. There was a judicial system in place, there was a taxation system, but they had peace. And Augustus's achievement was that he was able to evolve and set up a structure of government and of defense which kept that peace.
Augustus brought off a miracle. He brought to an end 100 years of political strife within Rome. What he managed to do was to change Rome from a republic, which was torn with civil war, into a stable monarchy. That was an amazing achievement. Not only did he achieve it, but his successors managed to continue the system which he had created.
The new order established in the reign of Augustus would endure for centuries, but the fortunes of his imperial family were less assured. Among his immediate successors were two of Rome's most notorious emperors, Caligula and Nero. In comparison, many would look back to the first of the emperors as the finest.